Haynes King returning at quarterback for the Georgia Tech Yellow Jackets. After almost beating Georgia in 8 overtimes, they had a pretty solid season last year, going 7-6. But this year, we think they can be much better. Starting off, they face Colorado on the road. No more Shadur Sanders or Travis Hunter for the Buffaloes, but they're bringing in Caden Salter, a transfer quarterback from Liberty who has a lot of potential. He's a solid dual threat quarterback, and I think he's going to do really well in the Deion Sanders offense. But we like Georgia Tech considerably better than Colorado. I do think that even though they're on the road, they will beat the Buffaloes in week 1, and then don't even really need to talk about week 2. That is Gardner Webb. That will be a win for Georgia Tech. So they will be 2-0 heading into their matchup with Clemson.
And this is a very interesting game. They are hosting Clemson, so they do have the home field advantage there. But Clemson has Cade Klubnik returning. They have Peter Woods, TJ Parker in the defensive line, who are top 10 prospects in next year's NFL draft. Dabo Swinney still the head coach, and he finally decided to take advantage of the transfer portal. Wide receiver core is top 5 in the country. Everything is pointing the right way for this Clemson Tiger team to return to an elite championship level type of a team. I think the Tigers are going to walk out with a win here, but Georgia Tech will give them a run for their money. We saw Georgia Tech beat Miami last year when Miami was still undefeated. We saw them, like Jonah was saying, nearly knock off the eventual SEC champs in the Georgia Bulldogs. Georgia Tech is not a team to mess around with, and Clemson will find that out early on in the season, but they should still be able to come out with their win because I trust Cade Klubnik more than Haynes King early on in the season.
Yeah, completely agree with that. They'll move to 3-1 though in a super easy bounce back game over Temple, and then an easier game to maybe move into the win column in the ACC. That'll be at Wake Forest. Not too much to look forward to for this Wake Forest team. I think they're going to be one of the worst teams in the ACC. Georgia Tech probably gets through this one pretty easily as well. And then after their first bye week, it's Virginia Tech. And the Hokies are bringing back Kyron Drones, but they're losing a decent amount of talent. I think that they're maybe going to be around the same level we saw them at last year. And just overall, I think that Georgia Tech is a considerably better team than Virginia Tech. The Yellow Jackets should be able to get this win as well, moving to 5-1, heading into a really intriguing matchup on the road against Duke.
Duke is bringing in Darian Mensah from Tulane. They're paying him $2 million a year to be a Blue Devil. And they're moving on from Malik Murphy, who's off to Oregon State after he led them to a 9-4 season, keeping Duke in the top tier of ACC teams, or in at least the top half of the ACC standings, which is where they found themselves since Riley Leonard first led them there. And I think Duke is going to once again stick around as one of the better teams in the ACC. And much like Georgia Tech, they have a lot of dark horse potential and a lot of upset potential against these top ACC teams. Against Georgia Tech, though, really could go either way. Georgia Tech might be slightly more talented, especially with some of the offensive talent they're bringing in, like Eric Rivers from the transfer portal from FIU. But something is telling me Duke is going to pull off a upset. If it you can call it an upset here, the home field advantage will be what carries weight here, and I think Darian Mensah will have a good enough game to outduel Haynes King.
That one should really be close, though. I like both of these teams a lot. They both have dark horse potential in the ACC. It's, in my opinion, Clemson's obviously the favorite, but after that, there's a lot of teams that could make a push for that second conference championship spot and maybe an upset away from the playoffs. Georgia Tech's one of them. Duke is also one of them. Next up is Syracuse back at home for the Yellow Jackets, and Syracuse losing Kyle McCord to the NFL draft, but they replaced him with Steve Angeli, a backup quarterback from Notre Dame, and I think he's going to fit in well with this offense. We saw last year they kind of just threw the ball a ton. Kyle McCord led college football in passing yards, but he also threw a ton of interceptions. Probably going to see something similar from Steve Angeli this year, but I do think it'll be able to keep Syracuse relevant. However, I like Georgia Tech more than Syracuse. The Orange are probably going to put up a fight for a little while, but overall, the talent on this Yellow Jackets team is a little bit too much. They will be able to pull out the win and move to 6-2.
And for Syracuse, it's also just they're losing so much offensive talent at skill positions to the NFL draft, including their starting tight ends, their starting running backs, and they've lost some of their wide receivers to the transfer portal. Particularly Trevor Pena is off to Penn State. So that's going to hurt them a little bit and make it a little bit easier for the Yellow Jackets to pull out the win here. On the road the following week against NC State, a very interesting team. Fell well short of their expectations last season, with some people thinking they could maybe contend for an ACC title, but at the very least finishing in the top half of the ACC standings with a solid record. And that wasn't really the case. They did finish 6-7 overall, but were 3-5 in the conference. And I think they have a lot more potential going into this season. I think they can learn from their mistakes with the young team that they have. Just a matter of can they put it all together. And I think against a team that's a little bit more experienced, like Georgia Tech, who has Haynes King returning as their starting quarterback, has been in the system for a couple years now. They have Jamal Haynes back as their starting running back after a very solid season. I think Georgia Tech is once again going to be the more talented team here and will be able to get a road win over NC State, moving them to 7-2 going into their final bye week.
And then after that, year two of Bill O'Brien at Boston College, Thomas Castellanos did transfer away, but he was injured for the latter half of the season, and the Eagles did pretty well without him. They are returning Grayson James, who took over for Castellanos after his injury, and I do think Boston College is going to be all right this season. Are they better than Georgia Tech? Even at home, I'm going to say no. I like the Yellow Jackets better. They will move to 8-2 heading into their matchup with Pitt. And this Pitt team is also one that we really like. Eli Holstein returning at quarterback, as well as a good amount of defensive talent. Pitt has a really good chance to repeat the success that we saw early on in the season from them last year when they started 7-0. Unfortunately, the Panthers finished 7-6, losing their last 6 games of the season. This year, I think they'll be able to do better. They are going to put up a really good fight against Georgia Tech. And in this scenario, we are taking Pitt to pull off a road upset over Georgia Tech, maybe getting caught looking ahead to their rematch with Georgia.
And what a rematch it will be. Georgia Tech, I think, going to be at one of their highest points in program history, one of the more competitive teams we will see from a Yellow Jackets team. And Georgia, quite honestly, is going to be a little bit lower than we've seen them in the past couple of years. Obviously, still going to be very successful. They still have Kirby Smart as their head coach, who recruits very well, coaches a very successful defense year in and year out. The question is just going to be the offense this year. While they do have a good amount of weapons surrounding Gunnar Stockton, who is going to be the starting quarterback, will have an entire season built around him rather than being thrust into the spotlight with an injury to Carson Beck as he was last year. I think he will have a lot of opportunity to succeed. I just really need to see a lot of improvement from him from what we saw last year because as we saw in the Notre Dame game, which was Georgia's one and only playoff game, he wasn't that good. Granted, Notre Dame's defense was very, very good. All that to be said, I think Georgia, especially after the scare they had last year against this Yellow Jackets team, I think is actually going to be due for a loss in this rivalry game. Give me the Yellow Jackets to pull off the upset over the Bulldogs.
I think this is going to be one of the best games of the season. Obviously, last year, like Connor was saying, 8 overtimes. Georgia Tech wants this bad. Haynes King wants to go out with a win in this rivalry game, and they need something to put on their ring for going 9-3. After they made one for going 7-6, why not put this on a ring after beating Georgia for the first time in, I want to say, almost a decade? The way too early projection was 8.65 wins for Georgia Tech, and we might have drank a little bit of our own homemade Kool-Aid, putting them at 11-1 with the original prediction. We've drafted down a little bit to a more realistic 9-3. The projection at 8.35 wins now, 5.35 and 2.65 in the ACC. The floor for the Yellow Jackets is going to be 7-5, 4-4 in ACC play, but I do think that they still have the potential to hit that ceiling of 11-1, 8-0 in ACC play. So thank you guys for watching. Please make sure to like and subscribe, and we will see you in our next video.